In the last 100 years, every nation that rose too fast eventually hit the same wall, the United States. It was Japan in the 1980s, Britain in the 1950s. Both tried to challenge America's dominance, and both were humbled, not by bombs, but by dollars. But today, for the first time in modern history, one country isn't bowing. It's China. And this is how China became the first nation strong enough to say no to America, and why the world may never be the same again. Since World War II, the US hasn't ruled the world by conquest. It ruled it through money. After the war, every major economy needed rebuilding. America offered the dollars, the loans, and institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and later the petrodollar system. And that became the oxygen of global trade. They controlled the money, and so they controlled the system. But with that leverage, the message was simple. If you challenge American interests, your economy suffers. This happened to Japan in the 1980s. Back then, Japan was unstoppable. There was Sony, Toyota, Panasonic, Mitsubishi, and they were all growing very, very quickly with export markets, and the US trade deficit ballooned. So Washington called a meeting at the Plaza Hotel, and the result was the Plaza Accord. The agreement forced Japan to let the yen appreciate dramatically, nearly doubling its value. So exports slowed, and to keep growth alive, Japan then cut interest rates. The cheap credit created a massive asset bubble that eventually exploded, and when the dust settled, Japan entered what became known as the lost decades, 30 years of stagnation. Japan didn't fall because of war or revolution, it fell because it yielded. Then we also have Britain. In 1956, Britain tried to hold on to its empire by invading Egypt during the Suez Crisis, but the US didn't approve. President Eisenhower threatened to dump America's holdings of the British pound and block an IMF rescue. And within days, the sterling collapsed and Britain had to withdraw. It marked the end of the British Empire, not with gunfire, but with a financial chokehold. Since then, no major country has truly been able to stand up to America's economic pressure. Until now, China's rise looks similar at first. A manufacturing powerhouse, exporting to the world, deeply linked to the US economy. But Beijing studied history, and it saw what happened to Japan. It understood that as long as your financial system, currency, and supply chains depend on the US, you could be broken without a single bullet fired. So China built something no country has ever built before, an alternative system. First, China locked down its financial sovereignty. It built up over 3 trillion in foreign reserves, imposed capital controls, and became the world's largest holder of US debt. That gave it a shield and a weapon. Then it developed an internal market of 1.4 billion consumers that was big enough to sustain growth even if exports are hit. It then also invested massively in infrastructure and supply chains, from roads, ports, railways, and entire manufacturing ecosystems that stretch from minerals to microchips. And finally, it created parallel institutions, the Belt and Road Initiative and the BRICS Development Bank, alternatives to the Western financial order. In short, China didn't just grow, it built resilience. One of the clearest examples of this new balance of power is what happened to Nexperia. Now, Nexperia is a Dutch semiconductor company, once part of Philips and later spun off from NXP. And in 2019, it was bought by China's WingTech Technology, whose investors included like state-linked funds. For years, Nexperia quietly made the low-margin but vital chips that power everything from EVs to washing machines. Then, in 2022, the UK government, under pressure from Washington, ordered Nexperia to sell at least 86% of its stake in Newport Waterfab, Britain's largest chip plant, citing national security concerns. And the Dutch government soon followed with its own action. After tightening its export rules on ASML's lithography machines to China in 2023, they moved to assert control over Nexperia itself. In 2025, using the Goods Availability Act, the Netherlands seized control of Nexperia's Dutch operations, arguing that its Chinese owners might relocate production to China. The state installed temporary administrators and barred major decisions without government approval. They essentially took control of the company, a private company. To Beijing, this looked like economic warfare dressed up as security. So in October 2025, China hit back. Its Ministry of Commerce announced export controls on Nexperia's Chinese subsidiaries and subcontractors, restricting the export of certain semiconductors and components assembled in China, even though the parent company was Dutch. It was a mirror move. If you can use your laws to block us, we can use ours to block you. And it worked, because much of Nexperia's chip assembly still happens in China, and when those plants slow down, European car factories feel it within weeks. The West moved first, but China proved that it can strike back, not with sanctions, but with the very factories the world depends on. Beneath all this lies another huge pillar of strength, the rare earth elements. These 17 minerals are the backbone of modern technology. Smartphones, EVs, motors, wind turbines, fighter jets. China mines around 60% of them, but it refines nearly 90% of the world's supply. The US can mine rare earths too, but most of its ore still goes to China for processing. So when Beijing restricted exports of certain rare earth minerals and magnets in 2025, it wasn't just about profit, it was a warning. You might design the technology, but we control the materials that make it work. Building new rare earth refining capacity elsewhere takes years, billions of dollars, and creates toxic waste few factories want to handle. And that gives China quiet leverage, invisible but essential. But here's the twist, this isn't a one-way dependency anymore. China still needs US markets, capital, and advanced chip tools. The US still needs China's manufacturing base, rare earth refining, and affordable goods to keep inflation down. It's not dominance anymore, but it's interdependence, something the world hasn't seen between superpowers in a century. And when Washington sanctions Chinese tech, American companies lose access to supplies. When Beijing restricts exports, global production slows. Both sides have vulnerabilities. It's a standoff between equals, each strong enough to say no, but too connected to walk away. The US can still pressure rivals with tariffs and sanctions, but every move now cuts both ways. Japan couldn't retaliate, Britain couldn't, but China can, with its grip on materials, manufacturing, and markets. The old strategy of economic coercion no longer guarantees victory when your rival literally builds your own supply chain. The world is entering a new equilibrium, built not on dominance but mutual vulnerability. America still leads in innovation, finance, and soft power, but China leads in manufacturing, logistics, and resources. It's a system not necessarily built by trust, but by necessity. In the 20th century, America could bankrupt empires with a stroke of a pen. In the 21st, the empire on the other side can pay its own bills. For the first time since World War II, the US has met a rival that it can't easily discipline. A nation large enough, independent enough, and integrated enough to resist and still grow. The question, of course, is who will win? It's whether the world can survive when both sides depend on each other to keep it running. Because this time, if one side cuts, everyone bleeds.